Hello and welcome to Japan Expert Insights and our Business Insights Room. Every Thursday, Tim Sullivan and I, Maya Matsuoka, lead a discussion looking for insights, developments, and new opportunities for the business in Japan. In this podcast, we welcome comments, questions, and opinions. So if you haven't done so yet, join us next time. In the meantime, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the discussions on Japanese politics, business insights, and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific region. Today, we're pleased to welcome Frank Foley, owner at Next Big Thing. Frank has a diverse career in Japan. He has held country manager positions with HarperCollins Japan, Universal Music Japan, and Guinness World Records. Our theme is country management and the challenges which country managers face, and also how they could be resolved for the benefit of the local branch in Japan and the head office of the company. Frank, let's start. Let's start.
Right, thanks very much, Maya and Tim, and thanks for having me back on Japan Expert Insights again. And thanks to everyone for joining on this it's a public holiday. The weather is beautiful outside, so I really appreciate you joining today in particular for all of those in Japan, and thanks for everyone joining from outside of Japan too. I'll try and keep this, in principle, keep it to within an hour. So I'll try and move through my part as quickly as I can, maybe 30 minutes or so, and then have lots of time for discussion, because I would like to learn. My main objective coming on today is to learn from all of you. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time to do that. So the topic is looking at country managers, and as Maya said, broadly divided. Is it better to have a Japan outsider or a company, a Japan insider or a company insider? So I'd like to approach it like this. First, just give some context and sort of look at maybe why this is important right now. Why is it important that international businesses should be thinking possibly more than they have in the past about how they choose their Japan leadership? But then also look at, to be honest, this has always been important. And in my mind, it's not just about selection. It's about selection, training, ongoing support. You see it a lot. Someone's hired and left in the country, and it's assumed they can do everything themselves. And the truth is that we're going to have to run into problems. We do need help. We do need networks from outside of Japan to help us get through these issues as well. Second, I'd like to really sort of question the title of my presentation, really. And is it just two options? Is it this binary option, or is there a little bit more to it? And I'll talk about quite an interesting piece of research that many of you may be familiar with, but it looks at this question of outsiderness and degrees of outsiderness. And third, then, to look back at those options and say, okay, well, which, in my opinion, based on my experience, and drawing on some stories from my own experience, but also stories I'm hearing from other GMs, what really is the best option for Japan? At the end of our time, I'd just like to talk briefly about a project I've launched recently, and it's all about trying to capture these stories from other country managers in Japan, and put it out there in a way that's going to help performance of international companies and help the performance of the country managers as well. Just to sort of nail my colors to the mast before we start, what I'm basically going to say is, look, gaishike are on the increase, and there are a number of reasons why that's happening. So, this is becoming more and more important to look at the issue of country management. Within country management, I think, the common thing, a lot of the issues are contextual and to the company or to time, but the common thing that comes up time and time again is about change management. A lot of what we're doing, there's an element, some degree of change management. And within that change management, I think that the most important trait of your country manager to achieve the company goals is to win trust. Winning trust internally, that's with your staff, with your head office, and externally with your partners and with your customers. So the ability to win trust, and I personally think that as part of winning trust, communicating effectively in a cross-cultural environment is critical to all of that. And that is not all about language, although language is very important. And finally, the big point is, and this sort of gets onto my project at the end, is that one of the things I've discovered since COVID and since we've all gone online and these great clubhouse rooms and great podcasts happening all over the place, is you realize this massive talent pool that's already in Japan. Now, I look at actual numbers of companies being run by non-Japanese in Japan, but we already have that massive talent pool out there that already knows a lot of this stuff. And my core argument is that companies, international companies, should be looking really carefully at that talent pool before possibly jumping to the default position of sending an expat from headquarters. So if you want to leave now, that's basically what I'm going to say. But please stick around, because hopefully I've got some interesting stories, and of course you'll hear interesting stories from other participants as well. Before I jump in, just a brief introduction. So I've lived and worked in Japan for a long time now, for over 2 decades. And I came here first as an exchange student. I did study Japanese and Japanese society down in Australia, Griffith University in Brisbane in Australia. Since then, I've worked as country manager for 22 years, and always in relatively small companies, ranging employee size from 8 to 80 people. So that's where my experience comes from. In terms of the industry and business, as Maya mentioned, I've been working in brand and character licensing, has been a lot of what I've done, mostly children's and family-oriented brands like Thomas the Tank Engine, Bob the Builder, National Geographic Kids, Guinness World Records. I've also worked a little bit in music industry. And that the wonderful thing about licensing is that it exposes you to such a range of industries and product categories. You deal with television, with all the OTT services now, with consumer products, apparel, theme parks. Anything you can imagine, anything that is brand wise works to have your brand on it. You're going to get involved. So you end up building quite a bit of experience across different industries and also building a great network. So to get back to the questions, why is this important right now? The issue of country management. One thing is that whether they'll succeed or not, and we're sort of all a bit jaded hearing this from the Japanese government, but they are making efforts to again increase the levels of foreign direct investment in Japan, and a big part of that they think is to increase the number of business visas issued, and so bring in more foreigners to run more companies. And you can see that these numbers are actually going up. COVID has obviously affected it, but when you look at the number of business visas issued, first-time entrants into Japan, it's gone from a very small number, from 566 in 2002 to around 2,250 or so in 2019. And cumulatively, this means it's gone up from a little under 6,000 in 2003 up to over 27,000 cumulatively in 2019. And that sort of reflects the overall opening of Japan since the early 90s. Before that, we sort of forget this sometimes, is that the idea of gaishike, where there were some big companies in Japan in the 80s and before, but they were essentially operating on the margins of the Japanese economy. The gaishike have really become a player since then, since the 90s. But of course, business visas doesn't tell the whole story. Most of us, there are almost 800,000 of us, myself included, on permanent residency, AGUKEN. And it's difficult to find out what all these people do. But I came across an interesting report from the TSR. It's called Tokyo Shoko Research, and they've picked up data from all these from various places and then sort of extrapolated from it. But they estimate that there are just under 27,000, which happens to be the same number as the cumulative business visas, 27,000 SMEs run by non-Japanese. And they did a survey. This came out just a few months ago. They did a survey of they contacted about 7,500 or so of these companies, got 619 responses, and based on that response, one thing you can say immediately is that these SMEs are largely from Asian countries. China and the Koreas combined account for 65%. The so what we call the Western economies, companies from the Western economies, and that's really at the end of the day what I'm involved with. North America, Europe, Oceania account for 13% of that total number. So from there, you can start to extrapolate the universe we're talking about. Another interesting number that came out of that research was that while it's still primarily male, while the owners of operators of these companies are primarily male, the 17% are run by female CEOs, which is about 3 times the number for the average of Japanese companies. So still low and an issue, but relatively speaking, there are more opportunities for women in the foreign-run gaishike. And of course, apart from anything the government is doing, COVID obviously has made this whole decision. You can't just send people out very easily from your home country anymore. So it gives even more reason for studying the local hire of your country manager. And so then, even if COVID wasn't happening, and even if you're not looking at why it's important now, it's always been important, the selection of your country manager. This is a high-profile position. It's, in my case, was very much this. It's almost ambassadorial. You're really out there. You're on television. You're doing appearances at trade events and everything. It's a very high-profile thing. So it's a big risk for the company if you get the decision wrong. Also a big risk for the country manager if the company doesn't do the right thing by you, because it's your local reputation that's on the line. It's a very challenging position. It's almost 2 jobs. Not only do you have to run a successful company and grow a successful business, but you've got to do it in this cross-cultural environment, and you've got to deal with the local business and challenges there, and also all the challenges that come up with managing the relationship with your headquarters and with your own boss. And as I said, a lot of it is about change management, and I'll get back to the change management issue in a little while. And I noticed we've got Ulrike in the audience today, and I joined the Japan Society talk yesterday, and it was so timely because it really set the context for what I wanted to say about change management as well. It was a great session yesterday. I'll just jump on there because we've covered a lot of that. So then, what are the options when you look at the choice of country management? So the idea of insider outsider is not new, and there's a lot of research around that. And when you're looking at a single country and decisions that are made within companies about succession. Ultimately the decision, it's driven by context and by the company goals and everything. And but I think as a general statement, you could say that companies, in any one country, they'll source from the internal market where, obviously they've got a succession plan. It's about continuity and stability. Or maybe it's a company where the business is so specialized that you really have to be an insider to run it. Or possibly it's a startup. That's a new company, new subsidiary you're setting up. And the knowledge transfer from the parent company is very, very important. So at least for a period, you're going to have an internal appointee running it. So, and when it's external, you're looking for major change or new ideas, fresh perspectives. And I think a lot of us would identify with this when we're employed locally in Japan. It's about some form of decline or stagnation. And sometimes it's not the company's hemorrhaging money or anything. It's actually operating quite well, but it's just not growing in the way that head office wants it to do. So there are those sorts of scenarios where companies will look to the outside, but that's in one country. Well, what happens when you take a different culture? What happens to the equation there? There's a very interesting study that many of you may have come across. It's from 2 management experts at Penn State. And it looks at the at the hiring of foreign and performance of foreign CEOs at Japanese companies. So it's a little bit different. They're looking at Japanese companies hiring foreigners. I'm talking about foreign subsidiaries, how they hire their country managers, but there are a lot of parallels. The one thing that they do is they divide leaders into 4 degrees of outsiderness, is what they call it. So from the company's perspective, from relatively low degree of outsiderness to high. Essentially, they look at Japan outsiders as a group, and then within that as a subcategory, the firm outsider or firm insider. And similarly, they look at Japan insiders, and again, someone who is also familiar with the company, or someone who is a Japan insider but comes from the outside. And it comes under the reasons for doing this would come back to the types of reasons I was just mentioning there. So the Japan outsider, firm outsider, the most high profile, famous one we all know is Carlos Ghosn. He was brought in from another industry and from another company to come in and do something, fairly specific and fairly drastic in Japan. And these people typically, they've got a great vision for what the company, what they want to do with the company. They've got the clout to be able to deliver all of that. But it's sort of so many non-Japanese elements to it as well. It's a shock and awe type thing, and it's not something that always works in Japan. It's a superstar type driven thing, high profile person like Carlos Ghosn, larger than life. And there's always this potential for resentment, the high salary, the luxury apartments, and all this suspicion that they're not actually operating in the interests of the company, that they're operating on self-interest, primarily on self-interest. The other type of Japan outsider is the expat from head office. So that's most expats that you see around Japan. And I experienced this myself, like working for a boss like that. And that was in the early days of Sky Perfect TV. And this was a case where where Western markets were way ahead of Japan, and News Corporation, as a company where I was at the time, was way ahead of anyone in Japan on the technology and know-how and marketing around pay TV. And so it totally made sense in that context. But it was a short-term solution. That was it. The people from News Corporation, they were all over the place in the early years. But once things are set up, and once you've got you've got a nice balance of bilingual staff and your Japanese bilingual staff and other Japanese staff, local staff, and some foreigners sprinkled in there as well, and maybe some people from head office in mid-level key tasks as well. You no longer, at some point, you no longer need that foreign CEO, and you need someone who's closer to the market. So I could see that works in a context as well. Moving to the Japan insiders, then the firm insider, who is Japan insider, firm insider. I won't spend too much time on this because it's fairly rare. Although I did experience it twice myself. Once because I was hired by a startup, by the one I just mentioned there in pay TV. And eventually I was promoted to run the company locally. So I suppose in a sense I had been in Japan before, hired as part of a startup, and then ended up running that startup. And that, it worked pretty well. And the other one is I experienced, is pretty less common, is that I was rehired by a company. So I already knew their company first time around and came back into it already knowing a lot about Japan. But I won't spend too much time on that. Where I want to spend time is on where most of us fall into, and that's where we're here in Japan and we know all about Japan, but we would be new to the company. And this is usually a case, at least in my experiences, where it's an established business. They need some sort of change, but they need that change on a Japanese timetable and done in an empathetic way for in dealing with Japan. You're the first thing typically that you're doing is you're trying to understand where your brand, where your product fits in the Japanese consumer's life. What need are they perceiving, and then you've got to come up with a local strategy, and that often means tweaking your business in various ways. And I've had several experiences of that, and I hearing more and more stories from other GMs along those lines as well, or country managers along those lines. And one of the big things you've got to do in all this is this, as I mentioned earlier on, is managing change, change of corporate culture, change in the way people are thinking, and it's in these areas where I think it comes down to things that you can't learn from outside of Japan, things you can't learn from textbook, things you can't learn in a really short time. You've really got to have been here and gone through it a few times to really get a feel for how to do these things effectively. And of course, the same applies to managing key partner relationships and winning that trust. As I said earlier on, is internal trust and also external trust. And then ultimately getting the staff on board and behind you on the plan you're trying to implement. And to do this, what I think the traits of a successful country manager then are you got to have a successful track record. You got to fail a lot as well to get that, but you got to have a track record in Japan. You got to have been there and done that and experienced it. You've got to understand Japan, have strong empathy for Japan and Japanese consumers, and it just always be your default position that it's the Japanese consumer you're talking about. It doesn't matter how successful you've been in other markets overseas, it's the Japanese consumer. And then to be able to solve problems in that environment. I hear these stories all the time, and you think, wow, it's fine. At some stage, these things are going to go away. But it's picking up on all the non-verbal communications that go around projects or tasks. You see it all the time. The one I hear most often, and I've experienced myself as well, is around like IT or infrastructure type system upgrade things, integrating the Japan office with a global system. And what happens so many times is that the Japanese team won't push back. They know something is wrong, and they won't push back. And there's shyness, or they feel intimidated, and there are lots of different reasons why that might happen. But they don't speak up a lot of the time. And that's where the country manager comes in. I've been told so many times on these projects, the GM doesn't need to get involved. The country manager doesn't need to get involved. Leave it to the IT people, the finance people. They'll talk to each other. And we'll put interpreters in there, it'll all be fine. But you just come across these problems all the time. I had two that I remember vividly. One from the early days of pay TV was a key system that plays out all of the shows. There were a lot of overseas engineers involved in designing that system, and they essentially brought it up from Australia. The dates were in the Australian order of dates and not the Japanese order. So we had Japanese people inputting the 5th of March, thinking they were inputting the 5th of March when actually they input the 3rd of May. That could have been a disaster for the business. It really drove the whole broadcasting business, that system. Similar problems with companies trying to integrate, and this was a personal experience, being the guinea pig on a VoIP system, telephone system, which would have been a disaster if we'd gone ahead with it. Networks, you do not have a network if you just arrive from head office, and the networks that we all have take years and to build, and building the trust to really have a network that means anything is something that you only get from being here for a long time. I was thinking, just talking to a friend the other day, and I was thinking, well, what if you got a job back in your own country and you were told that, well, the only drawback is you're not allowed to talk directly to your own team. Sorry, this is getting on to language, internal issues. But imagine if you were told you weren't allowed to talk to your own team. So I personally think that language is really, really important. The ability of the general manager to be able to, at a fairly decent level, be able to talk directly with their staff and to partners outside. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible for someone who's not a Japan insider and a Japanese speaker to run a company in Japan. It happens all the time, but these people are special and they're rare. And for most of us, we need to have lived it, and we need to be able to communicate directly with the team. There are two examples I wanted to give, and I'll move through them fairly quickly, and especially so one is about local strategy. The other topic is about change management, and I really would like to move to that one fairly quickly, because I think there might be, given the people we have on the call today, it might be a lot of discussion around this. On the local strategy side, as I said earlier on, it's all about understanding the Japanese consumers' needs and where you fit in all of that, identifying opportunities, and then coming up with the local strategy that allows you to take advantage of that. And a lot of it is, I've always thought of, you hear a lot about sort of group identity and why people behave in different ways when they identify with a group or don't identify with a group, and how they engage a lot more. The more they feel in common with the other people around them. And it's all about having this point of contact, within that group. And customizing brands and products is really, about that as well. It's about just creating contact points for that didn't exist in the product or brand that existed outside of Japan. Contacting those without compromising your brand, obviously. No, so you get someone from head office. Yes, they understand how the brand and the company as it exists overseas, but not Japan, and that, as we said, it really takes time. On the other hand, the country manager who knows Japan, obviously you've got to learn about the company and about the brand, but you're up and running, and this is the sort of not reinventing the wheel type of thing. You can really start to think from day one about all of this. Where are you with the Japanese consumer? What do you need to do to localize? What do you need to do to bring your team along to identify with that? What do you need to do with your key partners? I've had just so many experiences of all of this, and I'll just flick through them really quickly, and maybe we can get back to them later on. But Guinness World Records is one of the most interesting and exciting companies I've ever worked with. It's a unique brand. It doesn't have a competitor in the world, but its business model overseas, in its biggest markets, is in countries that have a Christmas gift giving tradition, and they sell the book. Everyone knows the book of Guinness World Records. But in Japan, that doesn't exist. In most of Asia, it doesn't exist. In the Middle East, it doesn't exist for the most part. So you got to figure out how to monetize the brand in other ways. And what we figured out was that what Guinness World Records really is about democratizing number one. It's about giving anyone at all the opportunity to be number one. So then it became, okay, well, it's not going to be in the form of a book. How do you make money out of that? How do you monetize it? The types of things we did in Japan in trying to understand the Japanese consumer, how they saw Guinness World Records, and what we could deliver. And getting back to this idea of local content, we just looked around at the market and we said, okay, well, what are people doing? In Japan, for many, many years, the hollowing out of rural economies has been a really big issue. But all of these different areas, they've all got their festivals, they've got their local produce that everyone actually loves, so they've got these things to sell. So we came up with a package. We called it the Machiokoshi, like a sort of cheeky kaste, revival type of package. We basically looked at what local festivals and what local products they had, and we created Guinness World Record challenges around that. And that gave them the opportunity to put on this big PR event, attract national media attention, and gain millions and millions in equivalent ad value from these events. The other thing we did was just focusing on artisans, and came up with records that really highlighted that. There was a Nihon no Takumi project that we had there. Another thing we did in Japan is, when you look at the Japanese consumer, possibly more than any other market, you get sort of multi-generational opportunities for brands that in other markets might be very specific to one age group, especially in the kids area. You get parents and grandparents even with the same merchandise, wearing the same apparel or the same carrying a bag as their kids. We did this with a couple of brands that really stand out like that for me. Were a brand called Pingu, which is really doesn't sell very well outside Japan much at all. It came from Scandinavia originally, but with our Japanese partner, we came up with a full sort of baby through to grandparent offering for that, and that was just because we understood what the Japanese consumer, so we were able to do that. We didn't shoehorn it in. We supplied a need that was already there. And similarly with Thomas, we took Thomas down to the baby category, which really helped. There are sort of no end of stories I can tell in that area there, but I want to jump to the other topic that I think is really important, and that's the idea of change management and corporate culture change, and then ultimately engaging your team and your external partners and bringing them along with that plan. Ulrike is in the audience today, and I joined a great session yesterday that hosted by the Japan Society on the idea of Japan, of similar theme to your book, of Japan's business reinvention, but specifically on how to lead corporate cultural change. And Ulrike had two guests along there, the heads of AGC, formerly Asahi Glass Company, and JSR, a foreigner, Eric Johnson. And it was looking at how these two companies managed to change from very traditional Japanese companies and move into more tech based and in some ways niche areas, but really transform what they were offering, and recognizing those opportunities, but importantly bringing the team along with them. Yesterday, and Ulrike can talk more about this maybe if we could ask her to join on the stage, but getting back to this idea of loose societies and tight societies and all around sort of the degree to which they observe norms, and Japan being at the tight end, so it's very observant of these norms and driven by that. So the idea there is that, okay, we need to focus on the norms. If you can change the norms, well, then it's going to be easier to bring people along on it. And the two CEOs really, what they highlighted, they're both multinational companies, and they talked a lot about how their management styles needed to be very different across those, a loose society, maybe like the US, and particularly in the west coast of the US, and more tight cultures like Japan. And Eric Johnson, for example, talked about how alien something like engagement surveys were for Japanese employees. So, a lot of these things that we do in other markets, they just, are inappropriate for the Japanese situation, and you've got to deal with it and in another way. And the thing that they really highlighted there was, constant and consistent and multifaceted communication with the staff. So ideally, you want to get everyone on board, but even if you can't, at least they'll understand why you had to make the decision to go ahead, and you can, bring them along for the most part. And I couldn't agree with this more as I was listening yesterday, and it's something that I've hope I got a little bit better over the years at doing. But there was a fairly recent experience where I joined a company and it was siloed. There was very poor communication, and to be honest, very low desire to improve that communication between different departments. I mean, it was so extreme that we had the sort of the equivalent of, I don't want to get into what industry it was, but the production department were setting their volumes to make their costings work without input from sales at all. So sales were just presented with this thing, with this product later on, and told that they had to sell, X number of units of it. And it was really, really bad. And that's just one example of where there was a breakdown in communication. And the solution was, transparency is such a big thing, and it's something I've tried to fix as one of the first things in any company I've come across. And it's capturing, a pipeline document that just captures the whole life of the product, and then that's shared and it's everyone's reference going forward. And then, but that's not all, as the two leaders were saying yesterday. Then you've got to bring it to life. And the way I tried to bring that pipeline to life was really in analog ways and in a variety of ways. We set up a hall of fame where each department set up, they visually represented what they were working on at any one time. So the salespeople could actually go see right back in time. It's like staring back into through the Hubble telescope back and seeing time. The salespeople could look back down the pipeline. They could see what the acquisition people were negotiating at this time, what production people were making at this time, what the marketing people were planning on doing with this thing. And of course, all these functions then become more overlapped, and you get more discussion and ultimately end up with better performance. There was that Hall of Fame, and then there were monthly presentations where then people actually presented those things that were sticking on the line, and then all the usual offsites and budget meetings and all this sort of thing. But it was all about, as much as possible, bringing the pipeline to life. And of course, out of all of that, you get ownership. It's very clear who owns what, and there's responsibility around dealing with that. And then that flows into rewards and recognition, rewards and celebration around things, and on trying to break down hierarchy and having people who actually did the work being recognized and rewarded for the work. I might just stop there. Is that, do you think, and ask for any questions? and then maybe just touch on two other topics at the end if I can.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. And so we can invite people to join us here now if they have comments, questions, observations, because, of course, many in the audience are based in Japan, or, well, our Japanese listeners today, I'm sure that they have worked in foreign companies, of course, and the foreigners who are here, they have worked for Japanese companies, I believe. So please join us and share your experience either here in Japan or overseas. So let's see. Let's continue the conversation.
Yeah. Hey, Frank, I have a question. And again, I've never been a country manager in Japan, but I've seen it, the mirror image of it. And I've seen, a lot of the Japanese subsidiaries in the U.S. Traditionally would staff it with, Japanese managers at the top. Again, they're running their American facility. But I saw a few companies that took a chance and they hired a local American. Sometimes it was successful and sometimes it wasn't. And when it wasn't successful, it's because the person they hired, the American, didn't understand the corporate culture of the Japanese company in Japan. And I'm not saying that they should have done it to run it that way, but they should have understood it. And so my question to you is, how would I say this? How important do you feel it is? Again, using your example, they hire a local Japan hand. How important is it to get that person up to speed of the home culture of the gaishike, so at least they understand, how the home office works better and are able to better maybe bridge the gap to make it work in Japan? Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, and it's actually the next section that I was going to jump to, but why not? I'll just address it now. And there are three things that I think are important. One is the onboarding process. I think that should be as thorough as it can. If you can, I mean, COVID makes these things difficult and everything, but in the long run, it would pay off to get that country manager, that Japan insider, company outsider person, get them over to your head office for 3 months. Just immerse them in the whole thing. Make sure they understand what the goals are, what the head office strategy is, and get them thinking in that context about, okay, well, what do we need to change in Japan? So then they come back and they hit the ground running in a way that's going to be, effective in making the changes and achieving the goals that they need to locally in Japan. That's one thing, is onboarding process. The other thing is, like, I think one of the big issues is that you're, like, as a country manager, you're often at the wrong end of a proximity bias. You're isolated. You often have, and all companies are different, but it does happen quite a bit where you don't have the support and protections that you would have if you were back in the head office. You lack sort of formal and informal mentors, for example. Various types of support mechanisms might be, even HR and that sort of thing. So companies focusing more on that, and that's why I emphasize it's not just hiring; it's about supporting and ongoing training. And I think that's really, really important. And the third issue is, and this is rare, but it's still very, very important, and that's boss issues. In most cases, and I'd say in my own case, I did count up at one point the number of bosses that I've had over the years, because they change a lot in foreign companies. I had 14 bosses over the years. As me being country manager, I had 14 bosses over the years, and I had three issues. One of them was actually 100% my own problem. So maybe two issues with two bosses. So it's a fairly low number, but it does happen, and it can be really bad. So I mean, the point is that not all heads of international are made equal, and more attention around that, to, again, from especially from the head office level, to when there is a problem, around the relationship between the head of international and the local boss, that there's a system in place to come in and deal with that. So yeah, I think it's incredibly important, Tim, and I think it's so, onboarding, constant support, and constant training, and then a process, a mediation or problem solving process that kicks in when there are critical problems.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I that was kind of what I had in mind. I mean, 3 months is probably the minimum amount of time. I also think the added benefit is because you're there for 3 months, you're developing relationships, human, face to face.
Yeah.
And I experienced it when I worked for a Japanese company in the US. They promoted me and they said, okay, in this position, you're going to have to be dealing with the home office. So we're sending you to Japan for 3 days, not
Yeah.
3 months.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, what do you want me to do? They go, we want you to go out drinking with everybody. That's all. I mean, it was just it was a relationship building mission so I could meet these folks face to face, get to know them as human beings. And so there was a lot of emphasis put on those human relationships. Again, I don't think 3 days was enough, but at least their heart was in the right place. And I think there's some legitimacy to not just the training, but the relationship development. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Frank, to your point about having empathy towards the, let's say the team and the local, customers and the local traditions and everything. So it is interesting. And I have a question to you. Do you think that empathetic country managers can be competitive or sometimes even better than people who have experience but are not so deep into understanding the local market and the local business culture?
I think I've pretty seen, two issues that relate to that when with the sort of the non-Japan insider, and the more common one is just because they don't know, they are maybe pushing an agenda that is really inappropriate, and they're not reading the signs that come back. As I said, and I hear this from a lot of other foreign country managers, is like the Japanese team, they won't push back, they won't speak up. And so the big role for us as the ones sitting in the middle is to recognize that, oh, wow, they're not quite communicating. Maybe the interpreter sitting in the middle is doing an accurate job in interpreting, but they're not really understanding the issues on both sides. And it's always the Japan end loses out. They're forced to take on this system that they know is going to cause them problems with their customers or with their back office processes, but they're just so that can happen out of no malice, but just on the head office side, they think they're making progress. They think this project is going really well when actually it's not. And then the less common one, but I've seen this time and time again, particularly with larger overseas companies, is an arrogance, a hubris, it worked overseas, you don't know in Japan, just go away and do it. And I have, personally seen, into the hundreds of millions of dollars wasted on projects that I knew were not going to work. And I heard a story just yesterday from a friend of mine who was also involved in this industry, and his example was closer to $1 billion, with just the business being run really hubris is the word that he used actually in describing it.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And Ulrika, welcome on stage.
Well, yeah, thank you, Frank, for the plug for the event we had yesterday. It was jointly between the Japan Zoominar and the Japan Society of Northern California. And I wanted to share just one episode because of what you just said. I once talked to a foreign manager who was sent to Japan to turn around or bring back to full speed the Japan operations. And he didn't know anything about Japan, but he had read one book. And don't ask me which book he read, but this is like 20 years ago. So he read one book and learned one word, and that was wa. And so he knew that consensus was important. So he walked in and he told everybody that his new platform would be, wow, he wanted consensus. And you all know, I can see, I can literally, even though I cannot see you, I can see you smirking and smiling because of what he got was that nobody said a word. Because of course we know, like, why is what you get when everybody has expressed their discontent and you found an agreement that everybody can live with, right? So it's not something that just exists. It's a crafted agreement. So I thought it was very refreshing yesterday that Eric Johnson at JSR, who's a fantastic guy, and he said his favorite word was honey. He was going to his guys, his managers, and said, "Okay, look, I have this idea, but I need your honey. Don't give me yes sir, no sir. Give me what do you think?" And I think that was very refreshing, right? It was the exact opposite of asking for wow. And so you mentioned the tight culture, which is actually a really interesting framework, right? And what that it's not good or bad that Japanese as a society, you know, rules are agreed upon and pretty enforced, but you see it in every meeting. The young don't want to speak up before their time, right? And their rotation. You don't say anything to the boss. And I thought Shimamura-san is very powerful. He's joking with his young folks, and he's making fun of them, and they're making fun back, and so everybody is sort of laughing. And then he showcases that as the right behavior, right? And so he's overcome these hierarchies by introducing sort of he used the word empathy, and I think it's actually sort of a respect, but also call on people to change their behavior. Right? And the hone I thought was very, very, very powerful. And so some culture management scholars think that Japan would actually be pretty easy to turn around, precisely because it's tight. So that the task is to convince everybody that we want to do things differently. This will take forever. To get the wa on the let's do things differently can take super long. But once everybody has agreed, you can actually turn that ship around pretty fast because now tight works in your favor.
Yeah.
So I would say that for foreign managers in Japan, the trick really is get the hone out, get everybody on board. Take your sweet time with that. Don't force agreement on them. Let them agree that they want to agree. And once that's happened, then the rest is pretty easy.
Yeah. Yep. I totally agree with that. As I was listening to both of them speaking yesterday, I was thinking of things in, you know, what have I done along those lines? And you know, a lot of it is about, for me, is about trying to break down hierarchy. Not always getting your information through, you know, your senior team. Being able to, in a way that doesn't put your senior team's nose out of joint, being able to talk directly with the other staff as well. And one fun thing I came up with it was actually my HR person who came up with this idea, and I thought it was lovely. Was I just joined the company, and it was in an area that it was in around the Akihabara area, not an area I'd ever lived in or wasn't familiar with. So the HR person, she sent on a note to all the staff and said, "Look, Frank is new to this area. He loves food. Take him out to lunch. Organize yourselves into groups of 3 people or 4 people and take Frank to lunch." And this is something that went, you know, spread out over about 3 months in going out with different groups. And it was a natural way to talk to people directly. And then the other thing that I only picked up on later on was the way they organized themselves. You know, I got groups of friends, not groups of departments. So on the same lunch and, you know, and talking to people at all different levels in the company, you know, I was able to get a real good feel over that time for what they really thought and, you know, what they really thought needed to change and what we should really be focusing on. And there were some lovely discoveries, you know, out of that. You know, I discovered that one of the junior people, this is you know, I'm trying to stay away from specific company examples, but this was in a publishing company, and we did manga. And one of the junior editors, she actually was a great manga artist, but she'd kept it quiet and she never talked about it. And I just saw her doodling on a piece of paper as we were talking. So I said, "This is great. Write the minutes of our discussion here for the lunch in manga." and I'll distribute that to everyone. As here's what the group I talked to today. And there were others. I found the interpreter who the previous country manager was from overseas, so his interpreter was very important in those days. But I speak Japanese, and she was feeling quite nervous that she might lose her job. But when I got to talk to her, realized that she actually was a brilliant digital marketing person, and we needed a digital marketing person that we were about to go outside and try and hire. So I totally agree with that approach. Is like figure out natural ways of talking to people about what they really think, and as you said, don't rush it. Take time. Do it in a natural way.
Yeah, I had to laugh with the Hone. A couple of years ago, I read a book written by Inamori Kazuo, who turned JAL around. And he came from Kyocera. He's the chairman of Kyocera, right? So you're talking about a manufacturing guy going to JAL and turning it around. And he said one of the biggest problems was getting his employees to speak their Hone. And one of his, and this was in his book, Saigo no Tatakai, Jaru Saisei ni Kaketa Keisha Jinsei. It was a really good book. And he said one of the things he used to do was he would stay late after hours, and he always had beer in his back pocket. And he would invite people up to his desk, and he'd open up beer and drink beer while talking to them after hours. And he even had meetings where he was passing out beer in the meeting because he thought, the only way I can get to the Hone is to, get them a little loosened up, So I thought that was just kind of an interesting point of view, because that's an insider Japanese guy's technique as well.
Mm.
Well, actually, that's what Shimamura-san mentioned at AGC, that he was doing a lot of drinking with them. And, that's the old adage that if you want to be a CEO in Japan, you need a very strong liver.
Yeah. The only thing I would say along those lines is that it's all about sort of doing the same thing in many different ways, because you don't want to gravitate towards any one group or a small number of groups in the company. You need to talk to everyone. So for example, not everyone drinks. Not everyone is going to feel comfortable about having a drink with the boss, even if they do drink. So I think you just got to do that same thing, but do it at the same time and consistently in many different ways, and then ultimately you'll get a good feel for what everyone is thinking.
That's a very important point, especially also for the women. So what I hear from female workers in large Japanese organizations is that one of their biggest challenges is that they're missing out on the mentoring.
Yeah.
That the guys know how to mentor guys, right? They go out to the izakaya and then they're told that, hey, you spoke up at the wrong time, or you didn't do this quite right, and next time do it better. But guys have a hard time figuring out how to mentor women, and the women, of course, don't really want to go, or cannot go to the izakaya. And so I think one of the biggest culture changes that we're seeing in Japanese organizations right now is the launch of mentoring sessions during work hours. And so I tell some of my students, as they think about joining a Japanese company to work there, that one thing they could ask is, do you have mentoring sessions, specific mentoring sessions for women? And if they do, then that's a sign of a very good and forward-looking company.
That's a very good point.
Yes, indeed. And it used to be the case when if women also needed to have a strong liver, so that they could go out drinking with their colleagues and get information about what's going on in the company and so on and so on. Thankfully, things are changing. Yes. Well, and Ren, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, and Timothy, always great room. Thank you, and Frank, thank you for the great insightful speech, should I say? And I was listening to it, and I noticed something that may be a little bit unique to what happened to me, and something that worked well on that uniqueness, and if this is becoming more common. The unique things that I had experienced was that I belonged to Gaishi or a foreign company here in the US. And I speak Japanese, of course, but I belong to the Honsha, the headquarter people. And then we had of course, the Japanese subsidiary in Tokyo, and he is a Japanese. And it worked quite well in the sense that maybe because I can speak Japanese, we got along pretty well, and there were a lot of risks that had happened that were quickly contained well, which we were told by some of the even superior supervisor that you guys really managed the risks very well. So I don't know if we got this lucky or this could be a good model. In other words, if a foreign company who wants to enter Japan, instead of thinking just two choices, should I hire a local talent or should I send a headquarter guy to Japan? How about sending a Japanese guy to the US, and which is to the point that Timothy was talking about. Let him spend maybe at least 3 months in the US, and then, actually hire a Japanese American, if you will, in the US, and kind of manage the project of what's going on in Japan with his or her Japanese counterpart that runs the Japanese business. Even a foreigners in Japan would be fine, I think. Is this a unique idea, or is this becoming a noticeable approach to this headquarter Japan subsidiary technique?
I don't know how common it is, but I have had the same experience. And it just happened by accident. It was with Guinness World Records, and there was a Japanese person in London who was totally bilingual, and she went along. She loved Guinness World Records. She went along there not at all because she was Japanese, but because she was in London and wanted to work for Guinness World Records, applied for a job. And it turned out, I found exactly the same as you found. So she became you for us. And having someone in head office, a Japanese person who could communicate on both sides, having them about that just helps us so much. Now she's actually back in Japan now, and she's running the Guinness World Records business for Japan. So it worked out really well like that as well. She had all that great training. She helped us while she was in London, got incredible training, came back, and is now running the business in Japan. So I definitely think that works.
Yeah, that makes two examples, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish more people would do that. Yeah. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Ren.
Thank you. If anybody in the audience wants to share their thoughts, please let us know, because we're going to close the room pretty soon. So consider joining or not joining us. So, Frank, thank you very much really for all your thoughts and insights here. Ulrika, thank you for joining us, and Ren as well. Tim and Frank, Ulrika, and Ren, if you have any final thoughts, please let us know what they are.
I just want to say we need more people like Frank and Ren and Ulrika, people who can bridge those cultures with the experience. So it's always nice getting those opinions. I really appreciate everybody's feedback on this.
And like you, Tim, because that's your background too. Right. Okay, Frank, how about you?
Just very briefly. So again, thanks very much to Maya and Tim for inviting me back and for hosting this, and thanks for everyone joining. I'll let you go now to enjoy the rest of the day if you're in Japan, because it's such a beautiful day outside. Just to give one short plug to just a project I have been designing for a while and have just started to do the groundwork on. I'm really keen to try and capture all stories from other experienced country managers in Japan. So I'm getting out, structuring it around sort of all the stakeholders, the customer related, successes and challenges, solutions, Japanese key partners, your local staff, and looking at sort of senior management issues and your general staff type issues, issues with head office and with your boss, and really just try and capture stories that will help companies make better hiring decisions when it comes to Japan country managers, and help Japan country managers just pool resources, share ideas on issues like that are common to all of the businesses that we run. And this is partly a call out to anyone out there who would be willing to and interesting to talk to me, who's had that experience as a country manager. And I am especially interested in talking to women. At the moment of 30 people on my initial list to talk to, there are 2 women, and I want to talk to more.
Right. Be informed that Frank is, well, he has an account on LinkedIn, so you can reach out to him there and communicate with him there. Well, as you have noticed already, he is really very easily approachable and, well, a very good communicator too, so there shouldn't be any problem with that. So, Ulrika, any final thoughts from you about this session?
Well, I want to thank Frank for a great session. This is always so much fun. I also want to let you know that beginning next week, I'll be teaching at this time of day. So I won't see you in a while, but I'll miss you, and I'll be back as soon as the quarter is over. So thanks for doing this, Maya. This is really a great Clubhouse event, and I'm learning so much here. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you for coming and staying with us today. We will be on air next week on Thursday at 8 a.m. Japan time again, so join us. Until then, you can find us at japanexpertinsights.com and our YouTube channel, where we upload all the conversations on Japanese politics, business insights, and the role of Japan in the Indo-Pacific region. If you want to stay informed about our upcoming events, you can follow us on Clubhouse, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Again, we're looking forward to your joining us next week. Until then, stay well and make the best of the day. See you.